Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the events of a day, the historic context in which those events took place, and the historic ramifications of those events. As always, if you have not yet, please hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, May the 23rd. And on this day, in 1999, I'm just going to go ahead and warn y'all, this is probably going to be a little bit of a tough video for me to get through because of the event that I'm going to be talking about. Let me set up some context for you. So, when I was growing up in the summer of 1999, I was 10 years old. And at 10 years old, I was a huge professional wrestling fan. Absolutely loved professional wrestling. And at the time, I was a big fan of the WWF, which is now the WWE. There were two national companies, the WWF, which is Vince McMahon and his wrestling organization, and the WCW, which was Ted Turner's organization. And I was a fan of Vince McMahon's federation. I was also a fan of Ted Turner's wrestling organization, but I was more of a fan of Vince McMahon's. I felt it was a better presentation. It kept your interest more than, in my opinion, the WCW product. And on this day, it was a Sunday, they were producing a monthly super show that they would do, that would be on pay-per-view. And it was called Over the Edge 1999. Now, my family at the time, I don't think we're going to be sent to the stocks and fruit thrown at us, had a way to record pay-per-view programs of this nature at the time. And so I was not going to be home that Sunday, but it was being recorded for me to watch on a later date, which would be the next day. And afterwards, about 10 o'clock, my mother called and told me that Owen Hart, who was a wrestler on the show, had been killed during this event. And I was stunned, and I just couldn't understand how. And she told me that he fell and was killed that way. And so the next day, when I watched the video of the event, we get to the match where Owen Hart, who was one of the wrestlers, and who was a great wrestler, he was a tremendous performer. He could wrestle a real technical type of pro wrestling that would resemble more of a classic style match. And he could do high flying maneuvers that is more of the acrobatics, more of the, kind of choreographed wrestling that you may think of with today's modern professional wrestling. If the only professional wrestling you're familiar with is the past 5 to 10 years of professional wrestling, you would recognize this much more. And he was an early innovator of that, and was a very, very talented wrestler in that respect. And he could blend those two very well. And Owen came from a long line of professional wrestlers. He was the youngest of 12 children. His father, Stu Hart, had a wrestling promotion in their hometown of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And all of his sons became professional wrestlers, and all of his daughters married professional wrestlers. It was a wrestling family, if there ever was one. And Owen's brother Brett, his oldest brother, had been the top wrestler in Vince McMahon's organization up till the fall of 1997, and had signed in the fall of 1996 a 20-year contract with Vince McMahon. He was very sought after by both organizations, the World Wrestling Federation and WCW. But he stayed with the World Wrestling Federation, even though at the time, World Wrestling Federation was the second promotion in terms of attendance, revenue, and prestige. A lot of people were flocking to WCW for guaranteed contracts that Vince McMahon did not offer at the time, and a mountain of money, because at the time Vince McMahon was not as wealthy as he would become later, and could not offer the money that Ted Turner's organization was offering. So, in 1997, Owen's brother Brett and the owner Vince the contract had to come to an end. Vince could not honor it. He was going to let Brett out of his contract and go to World Championship Wrestling and make that guaranteed money that he could have earned a year prior. So, there's only one problem for Vince. At the time, Brett is his world champion. And in the wrestling business, it's all choreographed. You don't win a title belt, you're giving a title belt. Vince felt that, and rightfully so, that Brett should lose the belt on his way out. Well, Brett didn't feel this way. He felt, forfeited, something of that nature, and he was double-crossed by Vince McMahon. He was told one finish was going to occur, and a different finish occurred. And obviously, if you're Owen, you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. They just did this to my brother, but I'm also under contract and have to provide a means of living and income for my family. The WWE, Vince McMahon, they rework Owen's contract and give him a new contract with more money to stay with the World Wrestling Federation. And he does. And at the time, the World Wrestling Federation was undergoing a transformation in terms of storyline. They were going more from a cartoon gimmick to a more real, serious, edgy, dark kind of presentation that was popular with television in the late 90s. Not the corporate squeaky clean image you see today. I often hear people talk about the trash on television, quote unquote, trash on television today, and that's not so. In my opinion, television has gotten much more tame from the late 90s to now. Just saying. So, you have that. And that is, they were wanting to put Owen in a gimmick where he was like having an affair with a woman. And he did not want to do that. That to him was, no, it will confuse my children who are watching. No, I cannot do that. He had two young children, a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old at the time of his death. So finally, the character they came up with was reprising a role he had played earlier in his career that was called the Blue Blazer. And this character was like a superhero gimmick that would wear a blue blazer to the ring and a blue like superhero costume, and would talk about drinking your milk, saying your vitamins, eat your prayers. Well, they reprised this role, but this time they made it a joke. They made it laughed at. And there was no pretense about we don't know who's under the mask. There were several occasions where fellow competitors in the match, in the storyline, would rip Owen's mask off, which is something you never hardly saw with a masked character. And it was revealed to be Owen. Well, on this night, they were going to have Owen descend from high above the arena into the ring. And part of the gimmick and shtick that they were doing at the time with lowering him was that he would get stuck or he would fall down right, when he landed, or tangle himself up. Well, on this night, as he's coming down, the quick release latch gave way, and Owen Hart fell to his death. And this is during the live broadcast, and the two announcers at ringside are tasked with coming back live to air after a pre-taped segment. And I'll never forget when they come back from it. I'm watching this over. I know what's coming. And Jim Ross, who's one of the greatest wrestling announcers of all time, if not the greatest, says there's been, beforehand he's like, we got big trouble out here. And then he comes back and he talks about how this is not part of the show, this is not a wrestling storyline, this is real as real gets. Owen Hart was supposed to make an entrance from the ring, from the roof, and he's failed. And they just keep showing the crowd. And his colleague, Jerry Lawler, eventually comes back. He had been up at the ring where Owen had failed, checking on him. And when Jerry Lawler sits down, you can tell on camera he's visibly shaken. And he says, it doesn't look good. So Owen is removed from the ring. And then Vince McMahon makes the decision that he's going to continue with the show. And about an hour later, 10 seconds before they come back to air, Vince McMahon's executive producer, Kevin Dunn, tells Jim Ross in his ears he's dead. And Jim Ross has to make the announcement that Owen Hart has died. He has tragically died here tonight. And it's just a tragedy. Owen Hart was a very young man in the prime of his life. Owen Hart was 34 years old on the day he died in Kansas City, Missouri. He had just turned 34. He turned 34 on May the 7th of that year. And it's just terrible how he died. And especially when you learn some more circumstances about his death. It's reported that Owen, as he's falling to his death, and he knows he's dying, says, "Watch out, I'm falling. He was more concerned about people that he may hit on his way down. That's what his concern was as he's falling to his death. That's a good person. I don't care what people think of people, but that shows a good person right there. And you learn that the device that they used to rig Owen up was not the usual carabiner that they used in the past. It was a quick release latch that is used primarily for sailboats. That is a quick release. It takes 6 pounds of pressure to release it. 6 pounds to hold up a man that weighed 227 pounds. 6 pounds of pressure for a 227-pound man coming from a ceiling of arena down. And not just a 227-pound man of like fat and just, a fat person. And I don't mean to demean people who are obese. But this was a muscular, strong individual. And Owen Hart was scared of heights. I can't imagine what it was like to be up there and then descend and hear the click and know that you are dying. And he left behind a wife with 2 young children. But there is, in my opinion, some good that come out of this. One, I don't think I've seen since a wrestler descend in the manner that Owen Hart did. They pretty much banned it completely in professional wrestling. Second is the amazing work that the Owen Hart Foundation does to this day in Owen's name. It has been set up by his widow, Martha Hart. And I'm going to leave a link to that organization in the description of the video. And what his widow and what his 2 children have accomplished. His widow, Martha Hart, is now Dr. Martha Hart. Dr. Hart went on to complete her college education and received a master's degree and a PhD in psychology. And it is an accomplished psychologist at the University of Calgary and has been published in numerous peer-reviewed publications and has won numerous awards for her academic research and work. And that is amazing. And his 2 children, his son, Oj, who was 7 at the time of his father's death, is an attorney. And his daughter, I don't want to butcher her name, she is a journalist. And that is, in my opinion, out of a darkness, some light that came, that Martha Hart could have chose one path of darkness and destruction, but she chose the light. She sued Vince McMahon for wrongful death of her husband, and she settled with Vince McMahon for $18 million and used that money to set up the Owen Hart Foundation. It was never about the money for her. I had been of the opinion that Owen Hart should belonged in the World Wrestling Entertainment Hall of Fame up till I watched a recent special called Dark Side of the Ring. The Final Days of Owen Hart. It's by Vice Sports. Incredible series. And after getting to hear Dr. Martha Hart's perspective and his two children, I share their opinion. No. In the World Wrestling Federation is the reason, in their mind, and arguably so, I will not argue that fact with them, that their father is no longer with them. And husband is no longer with them. And he, the WWE wants to profit off of that. And I agree. The WWE should not be able to profit off of that. Which they would if he was put in the Hall of Fame. So, I have changed my perspective on that after watching this special on Owen. So, this video I know is a little long, but I had to set up the context for you a little bit there. But on this day, in 1999, one of the greatest professional wrestlers and people that I would admire in the business that I was a big fan of at the time died tragically. Owen Hart is such a great wrestler that if I was to show a set of matches to someone who is not a professional wrestling fan, if I was to show them 5 matches to convince them this is maybe something they should become a fan of, one of them is an Owen Hart match. It's him against his brother from 1994. I would show them that match. That is one of the ones I would show. It's just a great classic. It's on YouTube for free. Owen Hart versus Bret Hart, and it's just amazing the talent that both of them had. So, if you're inclined, go check that out. And check out the link in the description to the Owen Hart Foundation. I was not aware until watching Vice Sports and doing some more reading the great work that this foundation does across Canada for people. It really does change lives. So, I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you all have a great night and a good evening.